Today we continue our series on responding to a fractured world, rethink, react, recreate. And our subject for today is higher education. Our particular subject is entitled Wider Education, Embracing Generalization, with Marcus Ford and Sandra Lubarsky. What some of you already know, what many of you already know, is that Marcus and Sandra are education innovators who have been working on reshaping higher education for some 30 plus years. I want to say 40, but they'll correct me. But they have been innovators who've wanted education to be more deeply engaged with the community, the larger community, and with the full ecological community. And so we have them with us today, and they're going to share some of their latest work because they've been engaged in a new university and a new research project, which they're sharing with us. Marcus is one of the first professors in the country to teach courses in sustainability and to develop an environmental humanities program. So he's not one who's developed just single courses and inserted them in curricula. He has been developing an entire environmental humanities program. And he's done this over many years, so his ideas have become more and more bold, and his creations have become extraordinarily effective. He's an innovative leader and also an amazing teacher and educator. Since early in his career, he's held that the most important thing we can learn is how to live sustainably and justly within the bounds of the natural world. He has taught sustainability studies at the undergraduate and graduate level and is an advocate for education that prepares people to actively participate in shaping their communities. In fact, his work has led him and Sandra to envision an entirely new concept, a communiversity that grows out of and supports the larger community. For Marcus, the community includes all creatures, as evidenced by a recent article he wrote entitled Reforesting, Rewilding, and Rethinking Civilization. He's also author of the groundbreaking book, Beyond the Modern University, and he has written many articles on higher education. I've read the whole thing because I couldn't resist. I'm so impressed with Marcus and always have been. I've never been in a meeting or a seminar or anything else with Marcus that I didn't learn something new and that I didn't get challenged personally and professionally to live my life in a different way. Most recently, Marcus is a co-founder of Flagstaff College Communiversity, which he and Sandra have done together and which they will discuss with us today. He's also taught with us in our courses here offered through Center for Process Studies and Center for and the Cobb Institute. And his courses have included not just environmental courses, but also economic courses, because he's done a lot of work in economics. Now, Sandra Lubarsky happens to be married to Marcus Ford. The two of them are quite a powerhouse pair. She's co-founder, of course, and president of Flagstaff College Communiversity, and she's been offering education for community in Flagstaff now for many, many years. She also took a time when she was at Appalachian State University in North Carolina and North Arizona University. And in each one of those places, she's helped to create an ecological program that was cutting edge, that became a model, an exemplar for other colleges and universities around the country. So she's had a huge amount of influence. She's also an amazing thinker. She's a wonderful thinker about institutions and structures. So for example, she's on the Center for Process Studies board, and she's always filled with wisdom in that board. She also is is very wise in thinking about the world. And one of her books has been a huge hit. The title is On Beauty. The subtitle, Douglas R. Tompkins, Aesthetics and Activism. Now that she's retired from her other academic positions, she is leading, she is actually the president of her new university that she and Marcus have done together. And she is someone who continues to write, to guide, to consult. I'd like you to know a little bit about her work in Jewish theology as well, because she has written another book called Religious Pluralism, Jewish Theology and Process Thought. She co-edited that book, and she has been active in those discussions now for at least 40 years and has written many articles on religious pluralism, Jewish theology, and the intersections of aesthetics and sustainability. So these are two people who are Renaissance people who are leading a postmodern rendition of the Renaissance. We welcome you and thank you. Marcus is going to begin, so we're in your hands.
Let me just thank you, Mary Elizabeth, for that over-the-top introduction. And I think I want to ask everyone to take that down a few notches. But Mary Elizabeth is the person you want to do introductions to you anytime you have a public event. But thank you so much, Mary Elizabeth, and thanks for inviting us to speak. Again, as I mentioned, I think many of you know that we've been working in education for many decades, and you've heard us speak before, so it's very kind of you to come again this morning. But this, I do want to say, this is the haunting of John Cobb in our lives, and it really is a pleasure for us, a joy for us to continue to hear John's voice in our heads as we try to do this kind of innovation in higher education and now public education. But Mark's going to go first. We're going to talk about wider education and generalization, first from trying to make change within the structure of the university, and then what we're trying to do outside of the university. Marcus.
Great. So let me too just thank Mary Elizabeth for her introductions, her very kind introductions. I think in Sandra's case, it was 100% accurate. And in my case, it was aspirational. But you get the general flavor of what it is that we've been doing for a very long time. So Richard, if you could bring up I have 12 slides, and my fear is I'll go through them too quickly, but I want to elaborate a little bit on each one. Thank you, Richard. So I call this talk Educational Reform on a Dying Planet. And I'm thinking about reforming the existing universities, colleges and universities that we have, and what kind of educational reform is possible and what kind of educational reform is necessary at this particular time. And as I was looking over this, I was thinking I could have just as easily and maybe better called it educational reform on a radically unjust planet, or educational reform on an unhappy planet, or a suffering planet, or something. But my point is that educational reform has to operate within a larger context, a cultural context, but also a environmental kind of context. What kind of reform what kind of education do we need now, and how do we bring it about? So the next slide. So this is my premise that our civilization is failing because our universities are failing, and in some ways that's a little unfair to higher education. It gives them, in a way, too much power. because, obviously our whole civilization is failing. Our government is failing. Our elected leaders are failing us. Our judicial system is failing us. Our economic system. But I want to focus on our educational institutions because, in some ways, I think that that's our best chance for survival, is if we can reform the way we teach ourselves, the way we learn, the issues that we study. That's our best hope for getting a better civilization and a better government, a better judiciary, and a better economy and stuff. Next slide. So John Cobb made this remarkable statement that on the whole, universities have done more harm than good, that I know some people take offense of. And I was trying to remember the context. He said, I don't think there was a whole lot of bitterness involved in it, or disappointment per se. I think he was just being, as he often was, just very factual and saying that, of course, universities have done good things. There's no doubt about it. And they continue to do good things. But he was very concerned about how higher education has socialized this into secularism and consumerism and individualism. And that when you look at everything universities have done, especially in the last couple of hundred years, when a lot of people have gone to universities, that on the balance, they've done more harm than good. Next slide, please. So you've probably heard some version of this, that changing a university is like moving a graveyard. You get no help from the people inside. And in some ways, I think that understates the problem, because in a graveyard, you don't get any active resistance. I think as a rule, but with universities, they are very set in their ways and very convinced that the way that things are doing, or with some minor modifications, that they feel that the university is that one institution in our civilization that's functioning very well. And if only it could get more resources, it could save us from ourselves. Next slide. So a lot of you probably know this, but for those of you who've had lives outside the university, you need about 120 hours to graduate over 4 years. And the basic structure is you have an academic major, and that's your specialty. And depending on the major, you might have a minor. And then there's this little part of the curriculum that's left over called general education. And it seems to me majors can vary. If it's a traditional major, like, I mean, again, traditional in a certain context, like history or philosophy or literature, it might only be 30 hours out of 120, which leaves you time to explore and to have a minor and things like that. But a lot of majors now, like engineering or dental hygiene, have 80, 90 hours of required subjects. So to get any kind of broader, wider general education, you've really only got 30 hours in the curriculum. And so my thought is, if we leave the majors are the defining features, and in some ways, the most sacred part of higher education. And so general education is usually kind of in the background, and in some sense, it's more open to transformation. So the strategy I'm proposing is that we leave the majors alone for now and focus on general education. Next slide. So here's a strategy. It's a strategy for a long-term reformation of reforming of higher education, but starting with general education. Next slide. So, quick history. For most of the history of higher education, the purpose of the university was the preservation and advancement of Western civilization. So very few people went to higher education, but the purpose was very general. And in that sense, all education was general education. There were not academic majors until you got to the graduate level. And then you could major in law or medicine or theology. Those were the great areas of specialization. But on an undergraduate level, the project was to, in a sense, socialize, inform people in the tradition that they were a part of, and prepare them to not only continue the tradition, but to make corrections and advancements. When in the 19th century, academic majors started creeping into higher education, there was this creation of the general education program to preserve something of the original mission of higher education. So you could major in chemistry, or you could major in literature or religion, or whatever your specialty was. But all students had to take these kind of Western Civ courses to, again, orient them in their tradition and to prepare them to be leaders in advancing that culture. And then in the 1960s, there was a resistance to that kind of general education. And so they said it was racist and sexist and Eurocentric and all those things, which it absolutely was. And so they redid general education into this distributional model. And now general education almost everywhere is like 2 courses in the sciences, 2 courses in the social sciences, 2 courses in the humanities, and then maybe a course in something else or something else. But it's very formulaic, has nothing to do with Western civilization, has nothing to do with culture, the environment. It's just simply 2 of these, 2 of these, 2 of those. Next one, and I'll try to speed up here. Next slide. So the advantages of this, again, what some people consider an advantage, other people would say is a drawback, but it avoids Eurocentrism. It allows students lots of choices in what courses they take. There's hundreds and thousands, actually, of courses at a big university that fit into gen ed. It allows faculty to teach within their disciplines. It supports the disciplinary structure of the university. And for those of us in the humanities, it's the lifeblood of certain departments, because if students didn't have to take our courses, they wouldn't. So those are all advantages. The major drawback is it provides no coherent worldview and no understanding of the current state of the world. So students graduate, they fulfilled all their requirements, but they don't have any comprehensive view of the world that they live in and what its problems are. They pick some things up on YouTube or TikTok or something, but they don't have any, as it were, academic understanding of the world that they live in. And then, of course, it does nothing to preserve or advance Western civilization or any other civilization, which might be, okay, next slide. So my proposal is that you could take those 30 hours of general education and create 10 interdisciplinary, transdisciplinary courses that students would take over the course of the 4 years that would inform them about the world that they live in, the health of the planet on, various measures of health, but also the social and economic inequities, and also explore with them the the history behind these things. How did we get to this situation? What were the cultural assumptions? What were the beliefs? What were the political forces that brought about the world that we live in? So these wouldn't be taking a history course or a environmental science course or a ethics course or something. It would be taking courses that were specially designed to help students understand current issues, how they arose, and what kind of solutions are both possible and necessary. So a whole different kind of curriculum existing alongside the disciplinary-based curriculum that drives the majors and minors in the university. Next slide. We can come back to any of these if it's worthwhile. Next slide. So the drawbacks of this is that it would provide students very little choice on their part. These would be 10 required courses, less flexibility and scheduling. Faculty would have to teach outside their discipline. Some departmental majors would go out of business, and that it runs counter to the value-free mode of education that is, the defining one of the defining characteristics of higher education. So there are real drawbacks to the kind of model I'm proposing. The pros are that it would provide students with important knowledge and understanding, addresses student anxiety over the state of the world. There's a lot of research that shows that students really they don't know much about the state of the world, but what they do know is disconcerting and troubling to the point that it interferes with their life. It would provide them with a context for making informed decisions, and it might save human civilization. So those are rather, to my mind, compelling reasons for a rethinking of general education. But it does, clearly there are cons associated that come along with it. Next slide. So who will reform higher education? Probably not academics. That's the relatively new revelation for me. The academics are deeply, deeply socialized into their institutions, and they are very unlikely, not for evil reasons, but just by the nature of who goes into academics, their training, their proclivities. I don't think we can convince academics that universities need to change. It seems like the best hope for changing higher education is to have some kind of public outcry that we need a different form of higher education, that our situation is dire, that universities are not adequately responding to the needs of our civilization, and forcing universities from the outside to change at least part of their curriculum. So when I say outsiders, I mean alumni, I mean public intellectuals, people like Bill McKibben or Naomi Klein, or the people that we read and listen to. But also there are these institutions like the Post-Carbon Institute, the Union of Concerned Scientists, the Sierra Club, that don't think of themselves as educational institutions. And yet they're keenly aware that our problems are mounting despite the fact that more and more people are going to college. They're keenly aware that something is existentially wrong with our civilization. And I think they could be convinced to put pressure on universities directly, or to work with the public to put pressure on universities to bring about change. So my new way of approaching this very formidable problem is not trying to convince academics that there needs to be a change, but trying to convince the public that universities are not meeting the needs of our society and forcing the change upon the university from outside. So the last slide is John Cobb, who has influenced all my thinking, I think, on every topic. And I put this quote in single quotation marks because I'm not sure he ever said it. But it's the sort of thing that he said for sure that theology is too important to leave to theologians. He said that economics is too important to leave to economists. If he didn't say this, he meant to say it and should have said it. So I'm going to just assume that he did say it and end with this quote that it's up to us, the people who are outside the university, to exert the influence that the universities are incapable of enough influence. It is up to us to force the universities to become the kind of institutions we need now to save the planet and to save our civilization. Let me end with that.
Thank you, Marcus. This was very stimulating. And we're in your hands, Sandra, and looking forward to it.
Okay, well, thank you so much. And here's the other side of what we're trying to do, and that is this idea of education outside of the formal structure of the university. And let's see, I've got a Canva presentation, Richard, if we could go with that. So we are calling ourselves, we started with the intention of creating Flagstaff College, and we have yet to go through all of the paperwork to change that title, but we are doing business as, if you go to the next slide, Flagstaff Communiversity. And I'll tell you that we wanted to start, our initial intention had been to start a micro college and actually to begin to build a movement for micro colleges with the idea that young people need to really understand how these issues that they're learning about impact their communities and how to then do the work that they need to do within their communities. But we ran up against two major barriers. The first one is one that's been noted, and that was accreditation. And accreditation is it's quite a structure for maintaining the status quo. And but the other was that COVID hit. And for us, actually, we had an epiphany in the midst of COVID. We thought, well, we don't want to lose the momentum that we had begun, that we had started with the work we'd done on micro colleges. And we began to offer online virtual gatherings called reading action groups. And what we realized is that there was this tremendous hunger for education, a way to continue to gain a depth of understanding about these issues that we're all facing, at least within our community. And so we came across the word communiversity, which we have not only adopted, but we are trying to define in the way that we think it should be defined. There are a few other communiversities in the country, but they tend to actually just continue the tradition of university outreach into the community, but for the purpose of economic development. And that's not the way we understand what a communiversity is. And we define it as education for community, in community, and about community. Okay, next slide. And Mark, I'm inviting Mark to join me in this presentation, who can add his two thoughts to his ideas to what I'm saying. But we realize that what we need is it is the case that even if you go through college, even if you go through 4 years of college, you can't learn everything you need to know in 4 years, and you will be living your life within a community that is facing really complicated issues, and that there is actually no platform right now in communities or for a continuity of education. And so anyway, we're proposing that in addition to higher education, we need something called wider education. And some people in the comments have pointed to that need as well. In fact, Leo has actually used that language. So we have been influenced by David Orr's important essay, What is Education For? And he says it's not education that will save us, but education of a certain kind. And Mark is making that case that we need education of a certain kind within the university. And now we're making that case that we need a continuing education of a certain kind as well. Next slide. So Flagstaff Communiversity, we make the community our orienting principle, and our intention is to provide education for the enrichment and advancement of community life. And we offer programs that are intentional, structured, and geared toward acting locally. I want to say that there was a number of years ago, Richard Heinberg from the Post-Carbon Institute was at NAU, and he gave a devastating lecture about the end of oil. And after that lecture, someone raised their hand and asked him, "Do you own a gun?" And that was in regard to this, again, this picture that he drew of that at the end of oil, that there is a huge threat of violence and of the dismantling of civilization. And so they asked, "Do you own a gun?" And his response was, "No, I don't own a gun. Where I do put my hope is in communities, and that we need strong, if we're going to withstand these threats, we need strong communities. And this is our effort to address that need." Next slide. If our communities are not functioning well, neither are our lives. And I think people know this on one level, but we haven't put a lot of effort into strengthening our communities and being engaged in them to the extent that we need to be engaged in them. So we have turned a lot of decision-making over to professionals and over to a very small minority of people who actually live in our communities. And that doesn't seem like it's working too well for many of us. The next slide. The most essential task that we believe that's before us is creating vibrant, just, and resilient communities. And that is what this communiversity is intended to do. Next slide. So our mission is to encourage, this is our mission statement, it's on our website, it's to encourage the democratic project of building sustainable, just, and beautiful communities and creating ecological civilizations. And clearly you can see where we have been influenced by what all of you are doing in the process relational community. And on the next slide, I just want to point out some of those influences of well, the next slide after this, I'll get to that, of process relational philosophy on what we're doing. Okay, the next slide. The overarching question that we're asking is, how can we create the kind of world we all want to live in? That's a question that Frances Moore Lappé asked in her wonderful book called Getting a Grip, but she asked it in the reverse way. She asked, why are we creating a world that no one wants to live in? And we're turning that the other way and saying, how do we go about creating the kind of world we want to live in? And how do we create the kind of communities we want to live in? And people actually are interested in answering that question when given the chance and the opportunity. Next slide. So here are some, I just want to point out the influence of the process relational orientation on the work that we're doing. And this is something we try to lift up to people so that they've got a grounding in a philosophical position. Again, most people aren't aware that they have a philosophical, that there is a philosophy that's informing their approach to life. But we emphasize that we're all individuals in community, and that the community is the public site of power and well-being in most people's lives, that we all have agency and the power to participate in life actively and creatively, and of course that all things are interrelated and have inherent value. The next slide. And then we also are informed by this Whiteheadian practice of transdisciplinary approach and an issue-based approach to what we take on. And we do focus on romance, on aiming for love and beauty and rich relations. And but we also move from romance to precision to generalization. And that happens in some of the projects that you'll see that I'm going to highlight. But there is this new category of citizen scientists, and we're promoting a category of citizen social scientists, activists, that each of us can become much more deeply steeped in understanding issues like housing, like alternative economic development, like transportation, and that rather than, again, leaving it to a small group of professionals to make these decisions about our communities, that we take on the task of becoming citizen social scientists and activists. Next slide. And we understand also that this is an aesthetic approach to movement building. Again, that dynamic between the individual life and then the life of the whole. And our hope is that we will encourage people to seek wider coordinations of relations and break out of this hyper-individualism that we have in these very small private lives, and this kind of reactive way that we have of being in our communities. So, for example, in Flagstaff, utility rates, water rates were just raised quite extensively, and the outcry, it's too late. But if you're in the mix, understanding how all of these things coordinate, you have much more power in shaping the community. But also the idea that our individual lives are become more vivid in correspondence with the community life, and the community, if it's functioning well, then enlivens our own individual lives. And that's, the aesthetic dynamic that Whitehead proposes. And next slide. I just want to emphasize that Whitehead's primary example of beauty is the cathedral at Chartres. And he says there are those statues on the left, each with its individual beauty, and they all lend themselves to the beauty of the whole. And you'll see those statues appearing again in the other slide. But that's how we understand what we're trying to do in these aesthetic terms. Next slide. Here we are. Here's our little chart example. On the left is a group of volunteers who recently built this Statue of Liberty puppet. And on the right is the protest with several thousand people who attended that rally, and in which our puppet appeared. And I'll tell you that there were probably, I think there was estimated that there were 1,200 people there. I would say 400 of them had their photos taken in front of Lady Liberty. Next slide. We started and we operate under this theme of the 3.5% project. And that comes out of the work of Erica Chenoweth at Harvard, who has found, she studied how nonviolent revolutions, how they, when they are successful, how they become successful. And what she has found is that when 3.5% of the population actively participates, that is when you begin to see serious social change. So we are aiming for 3.5% in our community. Next slide. We started in the during COVID with the 3.5% reading action groups. And I am not sure, this is a, we're gonna skip this promo that we did. It makes me uncomfortable anyway, since I'm the one speaking in this, and it's not my strong suit, but we were inviting people to join us in this reading group. And that was to read Kim Stanley Robinson's book, The Ministry for the Future. And I actually recommend that book if you haven't read it. It's very sticky. It's although it's technically or it's classified as science fiction, it's actually, there's not much fiction to it at all. And we had about 150 people join us in this reading discussion group. Next slide. And the way they work, then we ran a few more of these, but the way they work is that people come as it's kind of like mini courses. People come together, we put them into small reading groups. Some of them are virtual, some of them are face-to-face. We provide them with discussion questions and reading prompts and additional material if they want to choose to read additional material. And then we come together to hear outside speakers, both local presenters and nationally known presenters talk about something related to the book. In the case of the Ministry for the Future, we actually invited Erica Chenoweth to speak with us and Bill McKibben. In the case of this next theme, which was on what am I called to do? Cultivating an active heart and community with others. We invited Tim DeChristopher and also Paul Engler. And for those of you, you might know Tim. He's the subject of the movie Bitter 70, Bitter, B-I-D-D-E-R 70. And he spent time in federal prison for bidding on public lands, trying to keep them out of the hands of developers and fossil fuel developers. He's a very wonderful and brave man. And then Paul Engler, who has done a lot of important work on movement building. And Paul's book, I just want to say, is the important book called This is an Uprising. Let me give you the whole title, How Nonviolent Revolt is Reshaping the 21st Century. I highly recommend Paul's work with his brother, Mark. We also did another reading group with the theme of Naomi Klein's book, This Changes Everything, Capitalism versus the Climate. So you can see what we're trying to do in these groups is building community, but also giving people something more than a one-off of a reading group. So these reading action groups last for several months that people get together and read through something with some depth to it. And then we always invite someone from the local community to speak as well. In this case, it was Carol Davis, who works with the Grand Canyon Conservancy. Okay, next slide. We also, I'm just going to run through this quickly, offer writing workshops. You know, as you all know, writing is such a powerful way to go deep into understanding what you think about things. And this was a writing for healing, hope, and resilience. Next slide. And we have found that offering film series is also a powerful thing. So many of the things actually that the Center for Process Studies and the Cobb Institute have been doing are things that we're doing as well. But what we try to do is we look for the gaps in the community. Where are the conversations that aren't happening that need to happen? And one of the gaps in the community in Flagstaff is around food and food security and food self-sufficiency. We live at 7,000 feet. We saw the supply chains break during COVID. We know that we're here on the Colorado Plateau in a drought, a period of a drought, and yet the community as a whole has done very little to be attentive to how we might attain some form or the beginnings of food security. So we ran a film series around this. We also are, I think, next slide. We did a reading group around it, reading the book Regenesis. And then we brought in Austin Frerick, who's a wonderful young man who's working on the corruption of the food industry. But we're also bringing together all of a lot of young people working on food issues in the community, but they're working on different parts of it. So there's a group in town that's working on trying to support local farmers. And there's another group that's working on community gardens. And there's another group that's working on school gardens. But the gap that we're seeing is that none of them are working on the meta issue of how do you get the city to be making food as much of a public need and public utility, perhaps, as water is, as waste collection is. So to lift food up to that level is what we're aiming for. Next slide. We also then have brought people together to, again, these are gatherings that last 3 to 6 months. And this was a group on provisioning the future. It ended up being a group of 12 people meeting on a monthly basis for dinner and discussion. But the discussions, again, they're asked to do pre-reading and writing, and also to present a project that then they are going to work on in regard to the future of our community. From that group of 12, 2 of the people ran for public office, and one of them now sits on city council. Next slide. After the election, again, I just want to highlight the kinds of things that we're doing, again, trying to respond to the needs in the community that aren't being addressed anywhere else. I mean, we live in a university town. We have a mid-sized public university. We have a very nice community college. Nonetheless, these issues aren't being addressed in either of those formal institutions. After the election, people were wondering, now what? Now what do we do? And in this case, we brought together 25 leaders of local institutions, and we asked them 3 questions. I can't remember what they were. The first, it was basically it was, where do you feel threatened? And what is it that you need? And how can we help? And we had about 100 we had an overflow room. The room held 100. We had probably 150 people there wondering, what do we do in our local community to address what's coming down the pike here with this new administration? Next slide. The current project that we have is a year-long project, and it's called the Economy for the Good. And we are bringing people together to talk about how we can create a local economy that is develops develops the economy from the inside out. And rather than trying to do development, bringing in outside organizations to town, why don't we do an assessment of the community and figure out what the community needs are? For example, in our community, there is the need for childcare, for elder care. Anyway, we're doing a community assessment around our needs, and then a discussion based on Kate Raworth's book, The Donut Economy, about how we can construct an economic system that is different from the conventional system that almost every community in the country works on the basis of. And we have, joining us in this group, we have 2 current council members, 2 former council members, and a member of the Board of Supervisors. So I only say that because it feels like we're gaining traction with local leaders in the community who recognize the need to think about these things differently. And again, it's not happening at the university, it's not happening in the community college, where people might used to have gotten kind of a coherent conversations around pressing issues. They might have gotten them in their churches. Most of these people aren't church members. So it's happening here at our communiversity. And the next slide. The last thing we've done recently is to recognize the need that to be celebratory as well. But we were at a rally and thought, where is the joy here in this rally? And thought we need as a community to come together and have some community-based art projects and also a shared community giant puppets. So the last slide there is that, next slide. This is what we did. We had 25 people come together. We hired a wonderful puppet maker from Tucson who worked on Shrek and some of the Muppet movies. And she came up and she helped us build Lady Liberty. The thing I want to say about this is that not only was it a joyful moment at this rally, but that we are being contacted by all these small universities or small communities around Flagstaff that are much more conservative and where they have a lot more obstacles to expressing political opposition. And they are asking us, could they please borrow Lady Liberty? So the repercussions of doing these things is pretty great. Okay. And that is the last thing we want to say is that we'd like to say, let 1,000 communiversities bloom. And we encourage people here to think about developing this kind of platform in your own community. The most important thing is identify the gaps that need attention and build a model, not a monopoly. We have found that we can do this very for a low budget. We partner with others, and I hope that this is something that others will find a way to build community by being in community. That's it. Thanks for having us here to present about what we're doing.
This has been beautiful, and as someone wrote in the chat, inspiring. Thank you so much to both of you and to giving us these vivid pictures of what you're doing, Sandra. Thank you.